Today I'll finish the tale of Peter Rabbit by doing the covering. And because some people don't like the raw board edges of the Sewn-Board binding, I'll demonstrate yet another method for covering these. I mentioned it in one of my earlier videos. In the last video I made the text block. Now it's time to cover the book. I'll start by making the spine covering piece. I'll cut a spine stiffener the thickness of the book and apply it to a piece of book cloth. Then I'll cut the head and tail turn ends and cut it to width. This type of spine covering is called a breakaway spine. Because of the combination of the very flexible spine of the text and the flexible nature of the spine covering, these books open extremely well. Maybe the extreme flexing will have an impact on their longevity, but made with quality materials, I reckon they'll last at least 100 years. 3 generations of children. If yours doesn't last this long, let me know and I'll make you a new one. I cut the width of the cloth either side of the spine stiffener 30mm wide. This is plenty wide enough, and it's convenient as my longer steel rule is this width. I only use the Sewn-Board's binding on thinner books. I'd say 15mm or 5/8 of an inch is about as thick as I'd go. And I've found the spine width is a good width for the breakaway spine gap. So when I cut the spine stiffener, I cut a second piece the same width as a guide for the folding and gluing. Some people like it to be thinner, but if it's too thin it won't open quite as well, and at some point it becomes a tight back binding, which is fine if that's what you want. A great feature of the Sewn-Board binding is the variation that you can use. I've done 3 videos on the Sewn-Board binding. If you want to know more about how it was developed by Gary Frost and details of some of the design choices he recommends, I recommend you check out those older videos. I'm sorry they're not as well produced as my newer ones, but they were the best I could do at the time. And don't forget, the PDF of The Tale of Peter Rabbit is available for sale from my Patreon store, and the cover art is available for free in a post available to everyone. Before I apply the spine, I'm going to prepare the board covering material. I get asked a lot about printing on book cloth, so I'll do a quick demonstration here. There's less to it than you might think. I cut some white iris book cloth to A4 size. I might have mistakenly said it was Chelsea at some point, but it's definitely iris. Iris may have been one of the book cloths made by the Bamberger Calico Mill, which is closed. I've heard something about an Italian mill picking up the Bamberger Calico brand names. That's good news if it's true. Iris isn't one of my favourite book cloths, but the paper backing, lightweight and no surface coating make it great for printing. I believe it's 100% rayon. I've also found Arbolo buckram prints well with my cheaper inkjet printer. I flatten it out and load a sheet in the printer and print on it just like it was paper. At this point, I also stamp the title on the spine with the hot foiling press. When I get my favourite foiling press going again, I'll do a video on hot foiling. With these old manual presses, it's mostly trial and error, and everyone's process is going to be a bit different. I make a practice piece the same thickness as the spine and use this to get the pressure and temperature right and do any make ready. After doing the practice run, I did mean to adjust the word spacing, but I forgot. And here's another example of things that you normally don't get to see. I have no idea what went wrong, but the first time I titled the spine, it was way off centre. These things happen, and it was a simple matter to make a new spine piece. For the first example with the exposed board edges, now it's time to apply the spine covering. I use that second strip of card I cut earlier as a mask for gluing out. Following the original Gary Frost design, I will fill in from the edge of the spine material. 10 point or 300 GSM card is close to the same thickness as Arborlave buckram, which I use for the spine material. The turn-ins will still be noticeable, but it's hard to hide everything. Here's another example. In highly edited videos such as mine, the creator can edit out lots of things that don't work out and even lots of intermediate steps, and it gives the impression of almost effortlessness. For instance, I could have just produced the final printed piece of covering cloth at this point, like it had just taken me 5 minutes to knock up. In reality, it took me over a week of working on it here and there, and many iterations. And the worst part is that I still missed a problem. Have you spotted it? I didn't. I have two versions of the cover art. The one I'm using now has a blank spine area to save on printer ink. The second version has the spine area filled in with the same colour as the cover, so I can use it for covering the board edges. Another Gary Frost feature is drumming on or tipping on materials. The cover cloth will be tipped on at the spine breakaway line and then drummed on by only gluing the turn-ins. Continuing with the drumming theme, the pastedowns are drummed on, and then the final step is tipping the decorative paper of the end paper to the outer white leaf of the text. I put in some remay and blotters and let it dry under the weight of a brick. Not everyone likes the exposed board edges at the spine, so let's look at ways to cover them. In one of my older videos on Sewn-Board binding, I used small pieces of covering material to cover each edge of the boards. I mentioned that you could do it with a single piece for each the head and tail. I think it's slightly trickier to do it with a single piece, and thus why for the first demonstration I used what I thought was the simpler approach. But it's time to take on the challenge. I want to cover the edges with cloth the same colour as the boards, so I made another version of the cover PDF with the spine area filled in solid colour. After cutting out the front and back cover pieces, you're left with a conveniently sized piece of cloth for the edges. From this spine piece, I cut 2 pieces the width of the spine covering and then fold these in half and transfer the width of the spine stiffener onto the inside of these pieces of cloth. The tricky part is to cut a notch out just the right width. If it's too wide, the ends of the boards will show, and too narrow, and it won't turn in inside the boards. Be cautious on the narrow side. You can always trim a bit more out, but you can't put it back. These are glued to the spine, wrapping onto the boards. Because of the width of the board joint, the cloth over the boards will pinch a bit on the inside joint. Trimming a little bit off at a diagonal will fix this, just a hair, and now these can be turned in on the inside. Now the book is completed the same as the first example, except for one minor change. The iris bookcloth isn't completely opaque, and you could clearly see the transition from the dark blue spine cloth to the light manila infill card. To avoid seeing this transition, I decided to infill with the same dark blue arbolave. Otherwise, finishing the book is the same as before. And this is the oh hell moment when I realise there's something wrong with the back cover piece. The artwork isn't centered like it was supposed to be. I should have picked this up much earlier. I now know what I did wrong. It was a mistake caused by my beginner status using InDesign. This is now fixed and the currently available PDF should work. but you should check positioning before gluing anything to your book. Now I bet you're wondering, do you even need a separate spine piece? Could the book be covered with a single piece of cloth? I'm wondering this too, and prototypes are underway. If I find that it's a viable and useful variation, then I can see a binding of the tail of Squirrel Nutkin in the future. What do you think of the bare boards compared to the covered boards? Other options are to paint the edges with acrylic paint or use coloured board. And I'd like to thank my great supporter Casper for telling me about how he learnt while studying at Ascona to cover the board edges with thinly paired leather in a way that's described as adding headbands to the book. Thanks for spending a bit of your precious time with me exploring bookbinding. I hope you give this binding a go yourself. And thanks for your wonderful support that makes these videos possible. Until next time, cheerio.